What would you recommend, thinking of, our viewership is all over the United States and really all over the world, but our focus is for the most part in the Midwest.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of our viewers are coming from: Wisconsin, Iowa, Missouri, Minnesota, Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, kind of across that belt. What would be some really good apple trees to plant in that region that would do well for, low maintenance, survivability, the wildlife preference?
Two that come to mind is Liberty and Enterprise. They're both highly disease resistant. They're very vigorous. They'll get going quick, and they can pollinate each other. And for the Midwest, they're cold hardy, and like I say, they'll all come on a rootstock that have association in different numbers. That bud 118 is really cold hardy, so here in Iowa, where you can get down to -10 or 15, it can withstand that cold. So it's better to order those trees, get the right variety, the right rootstock, and all that stuff, and then you have a good, that's your foundation to get going on. So,
what spacing do you recommend for apple trees?
Like the rootstock I recommend is like a bud 118, so you're probably at 12 feet, between trees, and 20 feet between 20 to 22 feet between your drive middles if you're going to leave a place to brush hog and stuff like that.
Realtree's Midwest Whitetail is brought to you by RTP Outdoors, Trophy Rock, Redneck Blinds, Wilderness Athlete, Hoyman Tree Saws, Ozonics, Nikon, Easton Arrows, America's Best Bowstrings, Viking Solutions, Spot Hog Releases, Cabela's, Hoyt, Frigid Forage, Fuse, Grizzly Coolers, Drake Non-Typical, Wasp Archery, Muddy Outdoors, and Realtree Edge. Hunt with an edge.
I'm with Jesse Randall today from the Iowa State University Extension. He's the Extension Forester, and we're going to do a follow-up on some of the apple tree work that Eli Cook did on my farm 2 years ago. So we've got two projects. The first one is to prune a tree that was pruned 2 years ago. The second project is to take a tree that's never been pruned, and Jesse's going to show us that process. And Jesse's got a lot of experience with all of this stuff, and rather than me being a part of this, I'm just going to turn this whole thing over to Jesse and let him walk us through this whole process of how to take an apple tree that already exists and making it produce the absolute most apples we can.
So the first thing we're going to start with is some equipment basics. I use bypass loppers, sharp, and I also use a folding saw. Almost all my pruning can be done with these two pieces of equipment. If you have to fill the gas and start it up, you've probably waited too long to do the pruning. Part of what makes an apple tree produce apples is the stress involved with pruning. And so if you look back here, these are all water sprouts. And the first thing you need to know is this is 1 year old or 2 year old wood. It isn't going to bear apples. All right, so we need to get rid of these things that are going to grow vegetation and take away from the apple production. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to close my saw up before I trip on it. All right, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to make this first cut. All right, I've decided to take that whip out. Now, there are right ways and there are wrong ways to do this. And you can see that I've cut right there at the ridge in the collar. And by cutting right there, I'm going to tell that wound to seal over, and I'm also going to tell it, hopefully, not to send out a lot more whips. So when I look at this tree as a whole, anything that is broken needs to come off. Anything that's going vertical needs to come out of there. And then we need to look at the overall shape. because these branches that were really well formed several years ago are getting ready to bear fruit, we need to provide sunlight to those trees or to those branches. And so I can go through and I can take off anything that's rubbing, I can take off anything that is going straight up and straight down. And once we're done with that, we'll look at that overall shape. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to start making these cuts on this guy, all right? Take him out. If you look at this one, something happened to this branch. It has now died, and I want to take off dead branches. I don't want the decay to start in that tree. And so I look at these buds, they've died, but I've got a nice, healthy branch here. So I'm just going to come in with my lopper. I'm going to break that off, and now I see that this branch is coming into here. So I have to make some decisions which way this branch is going to go. I've got one coming off this way, and you can see all of these little spurs on that branch. That is what's going to produce apples, all right? So by us forcing those branches to go off horizontally, they're going to bear a lot more fruit. If there is something directly above or below another branch, that's going to be a problem because it's going to impede sunlight. And I have to look. I've got a really nice branch here and a really nice branch here. I've got one that's going quite vertical, all right? My goal is to let these guys, which are hanging out over the fenced area, again, I want these two branches to take and bear the most fruit out over where the deer can get them. So I'm going to take all of this production and place it into these two branches. So I'm going to take this middle one out. All right, I'm going to give the deer some food. So on all pruning cuts, there's a right way and a wrong way to cut. What I have here is an example of the wrong way and the right way to cut. And you're looking for the swell on that branch, all right? If I cut the wrong way and I use a flat cut, and so I make it such that I cut right from the top down, I create a wound on that tree that is really quite large. There's several square inches of open wood that has to be covered. If I look where I should cut it, right here, you can see the size of the pruning cut is much smaller. What would be left on the tree then are the callus cells that will form the seal over that wound. All right, so you always want to find the right location to cut. And on this tree over here, what we want to do, we have this branch that is going vertical, all right? It's not producing a lot of apples. I'm going to look right here, and I'm going to see that there's a swell right in here. And I'm going to take my saw, and I'm going to start, and I'm going to cut that branch off. All right. So I'm going to take care of that one. I'm going to finish, and normally what I do is I work from the center of the tree out, and I look at these guys in terms of, are they bearing any fruit? Are they, and a lot of times you can't always get to the side you need, so you have to move around. This one, I've had some mortality here, so I'm going to back it down to here. I'm always going to find a union to cut back to. I never want to leave stubs. When we leave a stub on a tree, what this is telling this tree is to produce new branches and not fruit. And so my goal here is not to produce more branches. So what I need to do is, I've done the gross pruning. I have to come around the other side, get a better angle on it, take it down to where I will have a collar and a ridge cut, because I don't want a branch here. I would rather have the rest of the tree producing fruit. Close to the branch, following that ridge and that collar. Normally when I look at these trees, anything now that's going up comes off. Anything coming back in on itself will be cut off. Pruning on fruit trees is an annual event. It's always done in the early spring. Late winter to early spring, when you're out shed hunting, is a perfect time to be pruning your apple trees. If you wait too long, you will have more green material that you're going to remove, and that's going to stress the tree too much. So I like to do all mine in the early spring. So now I'm looking here. I've got several more upright branches that we need to take care of, because again, upright branches do not create fruit. So if I look at these branches here, one, they are all pretty much sprouts coming off past pruning cuts, and they're all going back into the center of the tree. And so I want to take off these because they're not bearing fruit. They're going to make vegetation. Let me find that. There we go. Again, I don't need them coming back in the center of the tree. Grab my other set of loppers. We're still faced with a really nice branch right here. They've pulled it down again to make it horizontal, and you can see once you do that, all of the spurs that will form on those branches, and those spurs are only going to grow about a ½ an inch, maybe a ¼ inch per year, just to set a new fruit bud. All your vegetation growth is going to be out here, and so we manipulate the fruit on older wood. So by me coming in now, working around all these other branches and this wire, we need to cut these guys off. Getting in here, there we go. All right, so we're looking at that. I see on this branch really good fruit sets, and I have a branch that comes off the bottom and crosses. I don't like things that cross because they're going to rub and create damage on that tree. Anything going straight up, again, takes away production of fruit. So right here is a good example. We have all of these really nice spurred branches. They're all coming out at about a 45-degree angle, which is perfect for fruit production. The problem is they're all stacked on top of each other. And so even though we're going to take off some spurs and some production, what we're doing is we're putting that growth onto branches that will produce more and bigger, sweeter apples. I want a minimum of 2 to 3 feet between this set of scaffolding branches and the ones up above. And really, it's got a perfect distance between. So what could happen, or what should happen, is this entire branch from here up should be cut off. And what you'll have then is a double set of horizontal scaffolding branches. This tree will produce tons more apples than if you let that vertical center grow. I'm going to get down, take the Sawzall, we're going to cut it off right here, take the top off, and then during the growing season, we're going to come in with some cotton twine and we're going to pull this down. Okay, so we've taken the top off of that tree, and we really now want to limit the amount of material that we take off from here on out. We've removed quite a bit of that material, and we want this tree, we don't want to shock the tree, so we're done working on this tree for this year. So we're now at a tree that is now 11 years old, and it has never been pruned, it hasn't been shaped, but this is pretty common what we get or have questions about. This tree has not been stressed ever, and so it really hasn't had to forced into fruiting. And so now we have to look at this jumble of branches and decide what are our scaffolds going to be and how do we get there. I don't want you to go all the way to the first tree that you just saw in this 1 year. This is going to be a 2 to 3 year remediation for this tree. And what we're going to first do is we're going to use our spreaders, and we're going to get the shape of the branches that will eventually be our scaffolding branches. We might not do a lot of pruning on this tree this first year. We want these branches to start to get the idea that they need to be horizontal. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to get, and this is kind of a game that we have to play. It's a jigsaw puzzle. I want to start to get these branches into that horizontal position, because I can then take these spur woods and I can then start to work with some of these other branches that are now in that horizontal position. So next year, what we need to do is we need to take the top off of this tree. We'll just clip it here and make sure that these have stabilized. We'll clip it over here get rid of that top and put more spreaders in. And then the following year, you should now have your branches at the scaffolds and they should be stabilized. You can remove your spreaders at that point if they haven't already fallen out and take these guys out completely, opening up the rest of that tree.
I appreciate all the time and effort you put in here and all the education for our viewers and for myself.
It's a great way to add to your ground, is a few strategically placed apples and well-maintained apple trees.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, that's it for the segment on pruning. When we got back from the field and back to my office, Jesse sat down and went through the process of how to graft apple trees. And it really is a very cool process. I would call it the poor man's apple tree. We've done a lot with the poor man food plots. We're going to start talking about how to create your own apple trees on a really low budget. We'll do that next week, and then I believe Jared's going to get a couple of smoke bombs and show us how the wind swirls and what that looks like using the visual aids. Well, I appreciate you joining me. We'll see you right back here again next week for the next episode of Midwest Whitetail. And remember to always dream big.